I killed the engine and sat there in the driveway, letting the absolute silence of the night wash over me. It was a heavy silence, the kind that rings in your ears after you've spent weeks surrounded by the roar of hells and the shouting of men. The wildfire season had ended abruptly, cut short by a massive storm front that rolled in from the Pacific, and they had sent us home from the front lines 2 weeks early. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, just breathing. I was Albert Juan, a man who had spent the last decade fighting nature's wrath. But tonight, all I wanted was the quiet warmth of my home. I had driven straight through, fueled by stale coffee and the desperate need to see my wife, Audrey, and our daughter, Genesis. Before I step out of this truck and walk into the life I left behind, I need to ask you something. We often think our homes are our sanctuaries, but sometimes the things we fear are waiting inside. If you're listening to this, I need you to mark your presence here. Like this story, if you believe a father's job is never done. Share this with someone who needs to keep their eyes open. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight, and please subscribe to the channel. We are building a community here that looks out for its own. I looked up at the house. It was pitch black. It was nearly midnight, so Genesis would be asleep. But Audrey usually left the porch light on for me, a beacon in the dark. Tonight, the bulb was cold and dead. I grabbed my duffel bag from the passenger seat and walked up the concrete path. The air was biting, a sharp contrast to the heat I'd been living in. I fumbled for my keys, the metal clinking loudly in the stillness. But when I slid the key into the lock, the cylinder turned with zero resistance. It was already unlocked. My training kicked in. The firefighter in me, the part that scans for danger before entering a burning building, woke up. I pushed the door open slowly. The house smelled stale. Not bad, just unused. It smelled like dust and cold air. I walked into the living room. It was pristine. Too pristine. Audrey was not a neat freak, and with a spirited preteen in the house, there were usually sneakers kicked off by the mat or school books scattered on the coffee table. Tonight, the surfaces were bare. I walked down the hall to Genesis's room. The door was ajar. I pushed it open. "Genesis?" I whispered. Her bed was made with military precision. The corners were tucked tight. Her pillows stacked perfectly, her stuffed animals arranged in a rigid line by height. Genesis never made her bed. I had to bribe her to clean her room before I deployed. This room looked like a museum exhibit, not the bedroom of a vibrant child. It hadn't been slept in for days. Panic began to coil in my stomach. I moved to the master bedroom, empty. The bed was made there too. Audrey's reading glasses were missing from the nightstand. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed Audrey's number. It rang and rang. Finally, click. "Albert?" Her voice sounded thick, groggy. "Where are you?" I asked, cutting straight to it. "I'm home. The house is empty. Where is Genesis?" There was a long pause on the other end. You're back? You weren't supposed to be back for another 2 weeks. The fires are out. Audrey, I came home early. Where are you?" "I'm at my mother's," she said, her voice dropping to a hush. "We've been staying here for a week." "Your mother's? Why?" I was already moving back toward the truck. Audrey hated her mother. Beatrix was a woman who viewed affection as a weakness and control as a currency. "It's complicated. Albert, please don't come tonight. It's late. We can talk in the morning." "I am coming to get my daughter," I said, and I hung up. I drove fast. The roads were empty, ribbons of asphalt stretching out under the moonlight. Beatrix lived in a sprawling estate in the countryside, about an hour away. It was old money, the kind that builds high fences and iron gates to keep the world out. I made the drive in 40 minutes. The estate loomed in the darkness, a massive shadow against the sky. I punched in the gate code. It hadn't changed in 10 years. And drove up the winding driveway. The main house was dark, save for a single light in the foyer. I pounded on the heavy oak door. It swung open moments later. Audrey stood there, wrapped in a silk robe. Looking pale and gaunt, she looked like she hadn't slept in a month. "Where is she?" I demanded, stepping past her into the grand foyer. "She's sleeping," Audrey whispered, glancing nervously toward the sweeping staircase. "Albert, you have to keep your voice down. Mother is—" "I don't care about your mother," I snapped. "I want to see Genesis, now." "You can't," a voice cut through the air. Beatrix stood at the top of the stairs, fully dressed in a sharp suit despite the hour. She looked down at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. "She is undergoing a disciplinary interval. She is not to be disturbed." "Disciplinary interval?" I looked at Audrey. She looked away. "Where is my daughter?" "She is in the guest cottage," Beatrix said coolly. "She needs space to reflect on her disobedience." The guest cottage was a converted shed about 200 yards behind the main house, near the edge of the woods. I knew it well. It was uninsulated, little more than 4 walls and a roof. "It's 4 degrees out there," I said, my voice dangerously low. "She has a blanket," Beatrix said, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. "Go home, Albert. You are disrupting the process." I didn't answer. I turned and ran for the back door. I burst out into the night air, the cold hitting me instantly. I could see my breath puffing out in white clouds. I ran across the frosted lawn, my boots crunching loudly on the frozen grass. The cottage was dark. No light spilled from the windows. As I got closer, I saw the heavy padlock on the outside of the door. My blood ran cold. They had locked her in. I grabbed the padlock and yanked it. Solid steel. "Genesis!" I yelled, banging on the wood. "Genesis, it's Dad!" For a second there was nothing. Then a tiny, weak sound. "Dad?" It broke me. That single syllable was filled with so much pain and cold. I looked around frantically. There was a woodpile nearby. I grabbed a heavy splitting axe. "Before I swing this axe, I need to speak to you, parent to parent, human to human. We live in a world that tells us to mind our own business, to look away when things get uncomfortable. But right now, on the other side of this door, a child is freezing because someone thought discipline meant cruelty. If you believe that we must stand as a shield for the innocent, if you believe that looking away is the same as participating, then I am asking you, no, I am begging you, to subscribe to this channel right now. Join us. Because we don't look away. We do not let them freeze in the dark. I swung the axe. Sparks flew as steel met steel. I swung again, putting every ounce of my rage into the blow. The hasp gave way with a screech of tearing metal. I kicked the door open. The smell hit me first. Damp, freezing air. The room was a black void. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and landed in the far corner. There was no furniture, no heater, just a thin, bare mattress on the floor. Genesis was curled into a tight ball, shaking violently. She was wearing only her thin cotton pajamas. There was no blanket. "Genesis!" I dropped the axe and sprinted to her. I fell to my knees and scooped her up. She was like a block of ice. Her skin was pale, her lips blue. Dad?" she stammered, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely speak. I tried to be good. I know, baby, I know, I choked out, unzipping my heavy turnout coat and wrapping it around her, pulling her against my chest to share my body heat. I've got you. She took the blanket, Genesis whispered. She said comfort makes me weak. I carried her out of that frozen hell. She was dead weight in my arms, her limbs stiff with cold. The rage I felt was blinding, a white-hot inferno that made the wildfires I fought seem like sparks. I stormed back toward the main house. Audrey and Beatrix were standing on the back porch. Beatrix looked annoyed. Audrey looked deceiving. "Get the truck heated up," I roared at Audrey. "Now!" Audrey flinched, but didn't move. Beatrix stepped forward. "Put her down, Albert. She hasn't finished her time. Dr. Holloway was very specific about the 72-hour isolation period." 72 hours? I stopped, staring at the old woman. "You locked her in a freezer for 3 days?" "It has only been 12 hours, Beatrix said calmly. She was being defiant. She refused to apologize for her tone. This is for her own good. She is becoming just like her mother, weak, emotional. She needs correction." "If you ever come near my daughter again," I said, my voice trembling with the effort not to drop Genesis and strangle this woman, "I will burn this house to the ground with you in it." I pushed past them and carried Genesis to my truck. I placed her in the passenger seat and cranked the heater to the max. I wrapped her in the emergency wool blanket I kept in the back. Audrey was standing by the driver's side door, tears streaming down her face. "Albert, please. I didn't know it was this bad. Mother said it was just a timeout room." "A timeout room with a padlock?" I spat. "Get in the truck, Audrey, or stay here. But if you stay, don't ever bother coming home." She hesitated, looking back at her mother on the porch. Beatrix stood like a statue, watching us with cold indifference. Audrey climbs into the back seat. I tower out of the driveway, tires spinning on the gravel. "How could you let this happen?" I asked, watching the road through blurred eyes. "Mother said she found a program," Audrey sobbed, "for spirited girls. She said Genesis was at a dangerous age. She paid for it, Albert. She's been paying me." "Paying you?" I felt sick. "How much?" $45,000, Audrey whispered, "to cover the debts, to help us." I drove straight to the emergency room in the city. They rushed Genesis in. Her body temperature was dangerously low, mild hypothermia and severe dehydration. I sat by her bedside as they warmed her up with heated blankets and IV fluids. Audrey sat in the corner of the room, unable to look me in the eye. Around 3:00 a.m., Genesis stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked at me, then at Audrey, and flinched. "Dad?" she croaked. "I'm here, Jen. You're safe." She grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. She pulled me closer. "Dad?" she whispered. So low Audrey couldn't hear. "Don't look in the filing cabinet." I frowned. "What filing cabinet?" "In Grandmother's office, the big gray one. I saw it when I was cleaning. There are files with names." "What kind of names?" "Kids, from school, and pictures." "Dad, don't look at the pictures." The police came. I told them everything. The officer took notes, looked sympathetic. But when he heard Audrey had consented to her mother's care, he sighed. "It's a domestic dispute, Mr. Juan. Without clear evidence of physical assault, and since the mother gave permission, it's a gray area. We'll file a report, but don't expect an arrest tonight." I watched them leave. I knew the law. I knew how money like Beatrix's could make problems disappear. I needed help that didn't play by the rules. I called Barney. Barney was an ex-cop, a private investigator who had been forced into retirement because he refused to look the other way. He met me in the hospital cafeteria at dawn. I laid it all out for him. I needed him to understand exactly what we were dealing with. I took a deep breath and recited the facts. The timeline burned into my brain. I came home from deployment 2 weeks early. I told Barney, my voice flat and hard. My daughter wasn't home. My wife said she's at her mother's. I drove to Beatrix's estate. Genesis was in the guest cottage, locked in, freezing, crying. Grandmother said disobedient girls need correction. It was midnight, 4 degrees C. I looked Barney in the eye. What I will find in there is going to bury them, Barney. But I need to get in. Barney stared at me over his coffee. You're asking me to help you break into Blackwood Manor. I'm asking you to help me find out why my daughter is cheating of a filing cabinet. Barney nodded slowly. Beatrix has connections. If we do this, we do it fast. Tonight. Audrey had keys to the manor, but Beatrix would have changed the locks or the codes by now. But Barney was a professional. We waited until the lights in the manor went out. Beatrix was a creature of habit. Lights out at 10 p.m. sharp. We parked a mile down the road and hiked through the woods, approaching from the rear, near the cottage where I had found Genesis. Seeing that frozen cottage again made my hands shake with rage, but I pushed it down. I needed ice in my veins now, not fire. Barney bypassed the back door's security system in under 2 minutes. We slipped inside. The house was silent, a tomb of expensive mahogany and velvet. We made our way to study. The heavy oak door was locked. Barney picked it. Inside, the moonlight filtered through the heavy drapes. The filing cabinet Genesis had mentioned sat in the corner. It looked ordinary. Barney worked the lock on the cabinet. The top drawer slides open with a smooth glide. It was packed with manila folders. I pulled the first one, the name, a date of birth, the photo. It was a boy I recognized from Genesis's soccer league. In the photo, he was standing in a room similar to the cottage, looking gaunt, defeated. Jesus, Barney hissed. He was looking at a ledger in the second drawer. Albert, look at these numbers. I looked. It wasn't just files. It was a payroll. Beatrix was receiving referral fees, thousands of dollars for every child she sent to something called the Holloway Institute. But the notes were the worst part. Subject resistant, increase isolation, 48 hours, subject compliant, ready for transfer. Transfer? I whispered. Transfer where? I found the answer in the bottom drawer. It was a series of emails printed out. Correspondence between Beatrix and Dr. Holloway. They weren't just disciplining kids. They were breaking them. And the ones who broke completely? The ones who had no family ties or uncooperative parents? Overseas program initiate. Destination, Southeast Asia. Client requests. English speaking, 10-12 years old. My stomach was heavy. This wasn't a behavioral camp. It was a grooming center, a supply line for high-end trafficking. And my mother-in-law was a headhunter. We have to go, Barney said, his voice urgent. We have to get this from someone who can't be bought. We photographed everything, every page, every face, every damnable dollar amount. We didn't go to the police. The local police chief was on the guest list for Beatrix's Christmas party in one of the photos we found. We went to Keiko. She was an investigative journalist in Denver, known for taking down corrupt senators. We met her in a diner 3 towns over. She looked through the photos on Barney's tablet. Her face went from skeptical to horrified to furious. You know this is inadmissible in court, she said, looking up at me. Fruit of the poisonous tree. You broke in. I don't care about court right now, I said. I care about stopping them. Can you run it? I need to verify it, she said. I need to talk to other parents. Do it fast, I said. There are kids in that facility right now. Keiko worked like a demon. She tracked down 3 families from the files. 2 of them broke down and confessed they had sent their kids to Holloway. And the kids had come back wrong. Silent. Broken. One had run away and never been seen again. 3 days later, the story dropped. It wasn't just a local news piece. It was a front-page expose. The Blackwood Connection, How the Elite Sell Their Children. The article named Beatrix. It named Dr. Holloway. It showed the blurred photos of the children in the frozen cottages. The public reaction was nuclear. The pressure was too high for the local police to ignore. The FBI got involved within hours. I watched from my truck parked down the street as the raid happened. Armored vehicles swarmed the estate. They kicked down the front door, the same door Beatrix had tried to close on me. They brought her out in handcuffs. She looked smaller, frailer, but her eyes were still cold, scanning the crowd, looking for someone to blame. When her eyes locked on my truck, she didn't look remorseful. She looked annoyed. They raided the Holloway Institute an hour later. They found 20 children in various stages of isolation. They saved them all. The aftermath was a blur of lawyers and courtrooms. Audrey was questioned, but her cooperation and the fact that she was arguably a victim of her mother's manipulation kept her out of prison. But our marriage was over. I couldn't look at her without seeing her standing on that porch, letting our daughter freeze. I filed for full custody. With the evidence of the trafficking ring and the negligence, it wasn't even a fight. The judge looked at the photos of the frozen cottage and granted me sole conservatorship of Genesis immediately. Audrey moved to another state. She sends letters, but Genesis doesn't open them. Healing wasn't a straight line. Genesis had nightmares. She couldn't sleep without a nightlight. She flinched at loud noises. But we worked on it, day by day. We went to therapy. We spent time in nature, reclaiming the outdoors from the memory of that freezing night. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the night I came home, we drove out to a plot of land I had bought in the mountains. It was ours. No gates, no mansions. Just wild, open land. We dug a hole in the earth. Genesis held the sapling, a white oak, strong and resilient. For the ones who didn't come back, she said softly, patting the dirt down around the roots. For the ones who didn't come back, I repeated. Beatrix was sentenced to 40 years. She will die in a concrete box, far smaller and colder than the one she forced my daughter into. Dr. Holloway is facing life without parole. As I stood there with Genesis, watching the wind rustle the leaves of that small tree, I realized that the silence I felt now wasn't heavy like that night in the driveway. It was peaceful. But peace is fragile. It has to be defended. I told you at the beginning that evil waits in the places we feel safest. Beatrix was family. She was supposed to be a protector. Instead, she was a monster in a silk suit. There are monsters everywhere, hiding in plain sight, relying on our silence to operate. If this story moved something in you, if you feel that fire in your chest that says, "Not on my watch," then please, I am asking you one last time. Subscribe. Not for me, but to add your voice to the chorus that says, "We see you, and we will not let you hurt our children." Together, we are the light that drives back the dark. Thank you for listening.